Hey guys, welcome to another Warframe video, and let's do something different today because I've made so many updated build videos in the last 2-3 weeks, it's starting to feel really samey, so I want to do something different for a bit. So let's talk a little bit about the upcoming changes that are coming to Warframe, and I'm not calling them nerfs yet, by the way. I will call them nerfs once I've played with it, and they are obviously nerfs, but I've been burned way too many times, by saying, well, this is obviously a nerf. Then I've played with it and I was like, ooh, wow, that doesn't look like a nerf at all, does it? Remember the Sauron rework, Oberon rework, Hydroid rework? Everyone was like, wow, they're just ruining this frame, and then they got their hands on it and went, yikes, that's actually really good. So I'm not going to call them nerfs just yet. Also, some of them look pretty interesting and I'm curious as to how they're gonna play. So if you've missed the latest dev workshop, here is what may come to the game, because these changes are not final yet. Some of them may not make it, okay? So number one, Ash's Bladestorm is finally going to do what we wanted it to do originally. So now when you pop Bladestorm, you will mark targets, and once you press it again, your clones will go and attack these targets, not you, though you can still jump in with teleport if that's what you want to do. So as I've said, it does exactly what we wanted it to do originally before the first rework. Number 2, Atlas is getting a really cool new mechanic called Rubble, where if you kill a petrified enemy, they will drop rubble on the ground, which you can pick up to either heal yourself or if you're at full health, temporarily boost your armor. And to go with this change, they are making Petrify a little bit more useful and interesting, so you might actually want to use it in a normal mission. So number 1, the Landslide is going to do far more damage to petrified enemies. Number 2, using Petrify on your wall will increase the roll velocity and damage, and number 3, you can use it on your Ramblers to heal them. And I honestly like the sound of that, because what they're doing is taking an ability that basically no one uses and they're giving it a purpose, while buffing the other abilities at the same time, because Ramblers will now petrify, you can petrify while landsliding, and it's just overall a very nice change in my opinion. Then at number 3, they're changing the Resonating Quake augment for Banshee, the one that currently increases your damage, range and energy cost for each second you are channeling Quake, to where it will instead drop your Quake on the ground and allow you to freely move around. Now it will not expand anymore, but I'm really curious to see what people will do with it, especially in combination with Zenistar, because you can just drop your Quake somewhere and then throw the Zenistar disc somewhere else. Then at number 4, we have a couple of changes to Chroma, like his Spectre Scream no longer being hindered by the movement restrictions, and also getting extra damage from Vex Armor's Fury bonus. That is just a straight up buff to Spectre Scream, and is gonna make it more fun to use as well. And then we have 2 changes to Vex Armor. Number 1, it's now going to be a squad-based aura that currently has a 10-meter radius, which seems really low, so hopefully they will increase that, otherwise you will have to build for a mad amount of range to make it useful. And number 2, they're changing the Fury buff you get from Vex Armor to where it will multiply your weapon damage before mods are applied, rather than after they're applied. And I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, whether it's gonna multiply your weapon damage and then multiply that number with your mods, or multiply it separately and then add those two together. Now this does sound like a pretty big nerf, and it makes sense because they're saying they're finally fixing it because they were using some not so ideal calculations, but I have no idea how much of a nerf they're talking about, so I'm gonna wait for it to be implemented and for the math people to do their thing before I say anything. And let's just leave it at that. Moving on to number 5, where we have Ember with a change to her World on Fire. So instead of it being just this simple toggle ability that you switch on and off and it does damage around you, it will go through multiple different phases. When you first activate it, there will be a 5-second period where it works exactly the same as it does now, but after that comes a 10-second period where the damage will double, the energy drain will double, and the area will shrink by half. Now people just straight up decided that this is a nerf, but I am not so sure about that, because while yes, it's gonna drain twice as much, and it's gonna have a smaller radius, you are getting double damage. I think this may actually be a bit of a buff, because you are now able to get twice as much damage as you were able to get before, and I think you will still be able to get the old World on Fire playstyle if you just go more into efficiency and range, which you can do because you don't need strength anymore, you get damage from just keeping the ability on. So please don't quote me on this because I haven't played with it yet, I'm just speculating based on what I have read. But even if it doesn't work that way and the energy drain turns out to be too much, you could just, turn it off and on again. Then at number 6, we have a buff to Gara's Mass Vitrify because it will now scale with the health and armor of the enemies you glass over when you channel the ability. This is very nice, and I'm really happy to see this because even though I was one of those people that advocated for Gara being nerfed a little bit at the start, they went way overboard, so this is gonna help her a lot. And it's a nice scaling change because the stronger the enemies, the stronger your Mass Vitrify is going to be. Then at number 7 we have even more buffs, but this time for mag, so the shards created by Polarize will now scale based on your power strength as well as the percentage of damage done to the enemy. That is very nice. And Crush, her 4th ability, will now restore shields to her and all her allies whenever she does damage, and the amount of shields restored will be based on the amount of enemies affected by Crush. This is a really cool change in my opinion. Then at number 8 we have a couple of changes for Volt's Discharge. So first of all, they remove the damage cap, which is really nice. They increase the base damage from 750 to 1200, once again nice. However, the damage and stun duration will be reduced based on how far away the enemies are from Vault, though this is affected by mod, so if you have loads of range it's not going to be that big of a deal. And we top it all off with number 9, Zephyr, who has had quite a few changes. So they're combining Tailwind, her first ability, and Dive Bomb, her second ability, into one ability. She's getting a new second ability called Air Burst, which is going to be a projectile that does AoE burst on contact and will ragdoll enemies, or it can be shot into her tornadoes to make them bigger. This sounds really cool. And finally, tornadoes will now spawn wherever you're pointing with your crosshair, and you can steer them by moving the crosshair around. Though since you are spawning multiple tornadoes and you generally don't want them to be all in the same spot, it will only affect the closest one. And the final change to tornado, this one is really good as well, is that instead of changing their damage type as soon as they get hit with a new element, they will choose the damage type based on the element they've been hit by the most. So you can just pump up your tornadoes with, let's just say, corrosive damage, and they're not gonna switch over to, let's just say, magnetic because your teammate accidentally shot them. Now, I don't know if I'm missing something because the community seems to be up in arms about this, but I think those are pretty cool changes, and they are understandable changes as well. I honestly think the community is looking at this from the wrong angle. They're looking at it as in they're just nerfing whatever is fun or effective, but they're not really doing that. Otherwise they would change Sarin so she can't do the same thing Banshee can, or they would nerf Nidus or Mesa because they do too much damage. What they are doing, however, is changing setups that have very little player involvement in them. They basically just don't want you to press one button, something like Quake, and then all tap out of the game. And when you look at it that way, it starts to make more sense. Because they're not necessarily nerfing World on Fire, they just want you to turn it off and on again so you have some interaction with the game. I would just like to suggest that you read the changes yourself and you think about it, you think about why they might be doing this, because they're not doing it just because, there has to be a reason behind it. Also, the whole us versus them narrative that a select few are trying to push amongst the community is just silly, it makes no sense. But anyway, I think I've been rambling for long enough, so I thank you very much for watching. As always, guys, I hope you have enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.